Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Whelan, and as Chairman of the RDS Committee of Enterprise, it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's RDS Vision discussion on the future of sustainable travel and tourism. The tourism sector is of vital importance to the Irish economy, and pre-COVID was recognised as Ireland's largest indigenous industry, employing over 250,000 people. The devastating impact of COVID-19 on the sector has been well documented. However, as the vaccination programme starts to take effect, and with the prospect of international travel returning by the end of the summer, hopefully we can start to look to the future and how the sector will rebuild in the aftermath of the pandemic. The sustainable development of the Irish economy needs a strong travel and tourism sector. But as part of today's discussion, we would also like to address the long-term sustainability of the sector itself and its role in meeting the climate change challenge over the next decade. We're delighted to welcome Eoghan Corry, travel journalist, author and broadcaster, who will host today's discussions. Eoghan is joined by an expert panel who will share their insights into the current state of the sector as well as their thoughts on the future. Our panel today includes Pat McCann, founder and chief executive of the Dalata Hotel Group, Ireland's largest hotel operator. Pat has for more than 5 decades experience in the industry, starting off as a teenager working in the well-known Ross's Point Hotel in his home county of Sligo. He is a former chief executive of the RDS Hotel Group and founded the Dalata Hotel Group in 2007, which he then took public in 2014. Dalata is best known to the public through the Maldron and Clayton hotel brands and has growing presence in the UK. Ruth Andrews then is the chairperson of the Irish Tourism Industry Confederation, an umbrella group representing tourism interests throughout the country. Ruth is a highly respected and influential figure in Irish tourism with over 30 years' experience in the sector. Recognising her leadership role within the sector, the government appointed Ruth as chair of the Tourism Recovery Task Force, which was established last year to develop a strategy for how the Irish tourism sector can adapt and recover in a changed environment as a result of COVID crisis. Dalton Philips is the chief executive of Dublin Airport Authority. The Dublin Airport Authority plays an essential role within the Irish economy. It owns and manages both the Dublin and the Cork Airport, which welcomed a combined 35.5 million passengers in 2019. Prior to joining the DAA in 2017, Dalton held a number of senior leadership roles in the retail sector, working for leading companies such as Walmart, Morrisons and Brown Thomas. With the introductions done at this stage, I will now hand over to our host for the afternoon, Eoghan Corry.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction, John. Agus fáilte roimh go dtí an RDS. We have 3 panellists here for talking about an industry that has, appropriately for the RDS, effectively fallen off a horse in the last year. I know Dalton was a good show jumper. I don't think he ever fell off a horse, but he didn't compete here. Ruth has had 2 encounters with horses and is terrified of them, but her daughter, Claire Fisher, is an international show jumper. And as for Pat, I think your last encounter was a ginnet on Ross's Point Beach when you were young. I'm going to start with you, Pat. We're going to do 3 things over the next 42 minutes or so. First of all, we're going to take stock of where the industry is and what, the mess we're in and the best way out of it. Second of all, what shape is the reopening going to be taking for the hotel, inbound tourism and the aviation industry? And third, back to the brief for the afternoon. The next 9 years, Vision 2030, it's going to be a very different industry. That much we know. We know very little, but we do know it'll be different. And we will be able to talk through what those differences would be. Pat, I've heard you say many many times. Some people, the glass is half full, sometimes the glass is half empty. Yours is always 3/4 full. You effectively did something remarkable. You founded Dalata in the middle of a crisis. I think 2007 you founded it.
Correct.
September 2007, exactly 2 years later, the world came to an end, the global financial recession. By 2010, Dalata were the biggest hotel group in Ireland. That was a huge achievement. 44 hotels, 32 of them in Ireland. You used the phrase fleet of foot in the crisis. And is that what you, as a hotelier, as the leader of our biggest hotel group, have been doing over the last 14 months?
So essentially, what companies need to look at is, first of all, their position today and how they've got there. And the second thing, I suppose, is it's a time for reflection. And if you look at companies, the way they've structured themselves prior to the pandemic has meant that they've either come out of this pretty well or pretty poorly. And I think the combination of the two things is quite a challenge for a lot of businesses, particularly, I suppose, businesses in the hospitality sector, because they essentially rely on cash flow to keep them moving from year to year, and they wouldn't have a lot of asset base to actually fall back on. So that's been quite a challenge. But one thing I will say about the hospitality and the leisure business in its broadest sense is that it is an extraordinarily resilient business, because I think before this we were having a chat about all of the crises we've had to go through. And we've become experts at managing our way out of crisis. And this COVID crisis is no different. In fact, one of the big differences between the last one, which was the financial crash, and the current one is that the previous problem was about cash and the availability of cash, and the fact that the debt was a big problem. Whereas now we're in a situation where there's a lot of cash floating around in the economy with no real home to actually occupy itself for the moment. But that again will end, and hopefully we'll see movement now from the 2nd of June for us in Ireland. Yesterday we opened up our UK hotels, and from the 2nd of June we'll open up our Irish hotels, and we're really looking forward to getting back and to dealing with Ruth's people, and obviously Dalton having the airport up and running is a critical part for us as well. So there's lots of good things to happen. And I suppose we're all looking forward to being in a space where we can welcome guests back in whatever numbers they'll be available for.
And before I go to Ruth, have you seen a bounce? You've 12 hotels, and I think you've a load under construction as well. Yeah. Have you seen a bounce out of what we're looking at today on media? And how good does it feel?
It feels great, because like one of the things we've done since the latest lockdown, which obviously happened just before Christmas, essentially we've kept all our hotels operational. All 44 have been operational right throughout the last number of months. And it means that we are very ready to actually open our doors on a full-time basis to any guest that may be available. So if I could open tomorrow, I can do that. But in the UK, where we've opened our hotels to normal business, we've already seen a tick up. And what has surprised me is London has been stronger than we had anticipated, particularly on the corporate front, which kind of has caught us all a little bit off on the hop, for want of a better word. But as well as that, what we're seeing in regional UK, because it is a domestic market anyway, has started to move very quickly. And even our team were at Manchester Airport yesterday, and seeing the increased number of flights and the increased number of activity is very encouraging. So I'd be very optimistic about a very quick recovery from once we get, I suppose, the markets opened, when people can travel relatively freely. I think we'll see a fairly rapid response to this.
Ruth, you're looking very jealously at Pat there. The Tourism Recovery Task Force, we both served on it. You were chair of it last year. All of that narrative was about life support. We did not expect to be sitting here May 2021 still talking about life support. That's still the conversation.
Unfortunately, yes, it is, Eoghan, still the conversation. And you're quite right. When you and I sat around TV screens more than any table, devising that plan. And as we were developing it, we knew that there were changes the whole way through it. So it is a 3-year plan, and it's taken a short, medium and long-term view, because we know it's going to take time to recover fully out of this. But no, we had certainly hoped that by now, in terms of Irish tourism, that, let's be honest, 75% of the revenue for Irish tourism comes from the international markets. So the great hope that we had last December with the announcement of vaccines was that we would see that international recovery that bit sooner. But as with everything COVID, it changes on a weekly basis, and we now understand that it's taking longer. But I suppose we want to move beyond that survival phase. We want to move beyond life support. But as we've now kind of hit another summer that is going to be really domestic only, until hopefully we get to the latter part of the summer, where government are currently nuancing a message that says it's likely to happen come August. But actually what we really need now, given that there's pent-up demand out there, is to get an international message out there, and a clear, not a mixed message, but a message from government, from every part of government, the whole of government, that says, here is the plan for the opening of international tourism. And that will happen, and it will come at the latter part of the summer, and that's going to be important. But the industry will continue to need that life support, and government policy must ensure that that's enabled, and certainly with their plan that they intend to announce at the end of May, we certainly need to see that there is a sector-specific approach in terms of getting this industry. We've gotten it to this point. It would be an awful shame if government, after investing and supporting the industry to get to this point, it's terrific that Pat and so many tourism businesses will now start to open from June. And that's great, because now we're back in operation and we're going to have that product ready for when international happens. But we're not really going to see real recovery until 2022. So it's vitally important that government policy recognises that and continues to support us. But first and foremost, we need a plan for reopening. I mean, Pat just talked there about the UK and how its plan, you know, they've hit all of the milestones. They're back in business, how quickly the bounce has been. We need that plan too. We need indicative dates that we can actually give people that lead-in time that's going to be required, and no more than Dalton will, I'm sure, explain. You know, you just don't turn back on the aviation sector at a week's notice. And it's great that this time, even with the hotel sector opening on June the 2nd, they've known that now for the last, and will have had a 4-week lead-in, and that's hugely important. But the lead-in time for booking of international travel, so for ITOA members, AIPCO members who are involved in international business tourism, they need to be able to plan with some degree of certainty. They need to be able to respond to their customers' constant ask of when can we come back to Dublin. And here we are sitting in a studio, and it's terrific. Here we are with everybody vaccinated. We are getting there now in terms of our rollout on vaccines, and that is hugely commendable, and it's wonderful to see that happen. And it is happening now at pace. We need a plan that keeps, you know, to that pace of vaccine recovery, and that we can invite vaccinated people back into the island of Ireland.
Listening to you there, you're Chief Executive of the Inbound Tour Operators. A date is going to be very important because of that lead-in. You're also a special advisor to visitor attractions. Right. They're effectively clear to open now, but are there problems along the way there? Well,
there are, because it's terrific that they have been enabled to open. Outdoor visitor attractions were able to open from April the 26th, which was hugely important, and very important that people had somewhere to go and families had somewhere to have fun. And similar to have our indoor visitor attractions open now since last week is terrific. However, there's little or no demand, because 75% of their business comes from the international markets. And secondly, you know, the restrictions are still very restrictive. You can't do things like guided tours. Guided tours are the lifeblood of delivering the experience, and actually a terrific additional layer of safety that we move people and actually make sure that the customers' flow continues. And things like that, in terms of the ongoing restrictions, you know, continue to inhibit these businesses to actually get back to trading in any way profitably. So they're hugely anxious to get back to opening their doors. Many of them have. Many of them will have to wait until the hotel sector reopens, given where they're located in the countries. But when you look at our urban centres, like Dublin, for instance, again, you know, there's huge concern there. It is an internationally led, you know, customer demand base. And without being able to have events in Dublin to drive even domestic business into it, you know, it's going to be another difficult summer for all of the businesses in those urban areas, and particularly the visitor attractions.
I'm going to come back to that topic of different speeds for different sectors and different speeds for different parts of the country, that Dublin, west of Ireland thing we saw last year. But I want to bring Dalton in. I've never seen the aviation industry agree on anything. I mean, to get Ryanair and Aer Lingus to agree, to get Ryanair and the airports to agree on anything, but everybody came out as one voice a couple of weeks ago and said, we need a plan, exactly as Ruth says, to get aviation up and running. What are you looking at now? Because your results last month were very, very difficult. I mean, Dublin is, by international standards, everybody sort of listened to how bad Dublin Airport, things are in Dublin Airport. I mean, you're piping, you're getting people to stop the birds nesting in the terminal. But what they don't realise, that internationally, Dublin is one of the most disconnected airports in Europe. By international standards, across the 40 countries of the European Air Traffic Control Zone, we are the ones that are doing most to disconnect. Getting that going again, digital green certificates, all of those things we're reading about, they probably come with a whole set of problems, Dalton, from where you're sitting.
So clearly, as we've heard, we need some clarity, because to open it up takes time. There is huge lead times in aviation, from certification of pilots through to maintenance, through certification of security officers, etc. And so you need a solid lead in to get that right. And the challenge we have is, clearly we are very much an outlier from the rest of our European colleagues in terms of the level of restrictions, and, to be quite frank, the demonisation of the sector within Ireland. And so we're an outlier, and as an industry we've come together and said, look, we need clarity on what will happen when. And at the moment, unfortunately, we do have some news going into the media that says, you know, the opening could be in June. You're hearing others saying it's the end of the summer, and I think that is distorting things. And what's at play here is Ireland's competitive position in Europe, Eoghan, because, as you said, we box above our weight in terms of connectivity. So if you think of the island of Ireland, 6.7 million people, and if you take North America, Ireland would connect into 25 different cities in North America pre-pandemic. There are many cities right across Europe that are much larger than Dublin or Ireland that have no direct connections to North America. If you take Lyon, the number 2 urbanized area in France, has not one single direct flight pre-COVID into North America. So what's at play here is Ireland's connectivity. And we lost 284 million last year. It's, you know, that's a rounding error to the overall impact to the economy. We all know about that. Health needs to take primacy. Don't think there is any debate on that. But there does need to be a debate on how restrictive we should be versus the rest of Europe. And that's what's at play, and therefore clarity, so that when we can open, we're ready for that.
So what we need is something that aligns with what's coming out of Brussels. Is that it?
So if you take the digital green cert, which is the sort of the next key milestone on June the 26th, we need to be at the table, leaning in, ensuring that we can implement the digital green cert harmoniously with the rest of our European counterparts to ensure that there is consistency of approach. And clearly, we can't be left behind there. But it moves on from that. It's back to the traffic light system, which was introduced way back in October last year, disbanded very quickly, and we need that again up and running. And that gives clarity to airlines, it gives clarity to travellers about when and how they can travel into the country. Because at the moment, we're very much an outlier. As I said, Health needs to take primacy, Eoghan, but we are a total outlier to the rest of our European colleagues.
Now, the narrative that you've mentioned is very negative towards travel. There's a reason for that. The cases went through the roof in January. Everybody said the one-way solution is to shut down international travel. That's effectively what you've done. I think you've 24 flights out of departures in Dublin today. It would be 300 at this time of the year. But we are where we are. So getting that changed and getting the airport back up and running again, what shape is that going to take? And what do you need to happen to avoid the sort of scenes we saw from other European airports as travel was suddenly let go and people came out of the traps to try and get aboard aircraft?
You're absolutely right, Eoghan. I mean, it's a complex ecosystem. And there's a number of different, there's 20,000 people who work at the airport, from the airport to the airlines to the ground handlers, etc. And so we all need to work in unison together, and that will work best when there's clarity from the government. So if you take the digital green cert, for example, that'll be a digital passport. You'll come into Dublin Airport or into Cork or Shannon or wherever. But actually, we need to all be working in unison, because will that digital green cert be accepted at our electronic security gates or not? So will people be able to pass through quickly, or will we have long queues like we've seen in Heathrow, 6-7 hours, which Ruth will tell us is awful for the perception of Ireland as an inbound nation. So that all needs to work together, and at the moment there isn't clarity on what's happening when. And that's why, as you said, the airline sector, the aviation sector came together. We're cats and dogs at times, but we all came together. We were very clear on a 12-point plan, which we gave to government, and that's what we're saying. We need to get on this. And again, it's not, aviation and the sector is one part of a much bigger picture, which is we're a Western, a rock on the periphery of Europe. And we need to open the country. And yes, the virus, Eoghan, did come in through travel, be it through ferries or through the land border in the north or through aviation. But actually, it's been a very small part of all cases attributed to travel have been through through travel. And actually, it's an incredibly safe environment. Nobody has come into this country since the 16th of January without a PCR test. So we've sealed it pretty hard at the moment.
Pat, you are nimble, you're fleet of foot, you're ready to roll, you've kept your hotels and your staff in place. Not everyone is Dalata, they're not kings of the stock market, they don't have the resources to do that. Getting our hotel business or hotel sector, and I want you to talk outside of Dalata now for this, it's going to be quite complex, isn't it? Have we to look at just more than the nuts and bolts of the operation? Is there confidence at stake? And are there other things that need to be addressed by our legislators and indeed by our business community to make this happen and make this happen in some sort of meaningful way when it comes?
I think you've raised a good point, Eoghan, and to be absolutely clear, Dalata is not the hotel industry in Ireland. It's made up of lots of small operators, small businesses who do not have the resources that we have. And in order to get that back, there's a number of issues that are going to be very challenging for people. First of all, you touched on it, confidence and the mental agility of people to actually start to rebuild their businesses, which have been lying dormant for 18 months now, and to try and get back to doing that in a very quick and speedy way is going to be quite challenging. The other thing is the availability of people, because in most cases, not in Dalata's case, they let a lot of their people go. So they have the added complication of rebuilding their teams in order to get open. And in many cases, a lot of those team members may have left the country. So there's going to be quite a challenge for the hotel sector to actually, I suppose, rebase itself and come out of this. And like there is rumours already emerging about some hotels that may not open in June, that may decide to wait and see what happens rather than putting in the investment and the startup costs, and then finding that the business flow is not as significant as they thought, so therefore they might find themselves in a worse financial position. So there are lots of challenges around that. But I suppose, like, one of the things that the industry has to do is to start to look after itself, because if it's dependent on a government agency or a government body, it simply is going to be too slow, and it won't happen. So I'm a great believer in doing things for yourself and making sure that you put things in place that allows you to get open and Dalton touched on it, in a very safe and effective manner, because that's the key to it. Because what we don't want to find happening is that we've opened up and then suddenly we have problems and part of it or whatever has to shut down again. That nobody wants that. So I do think that, and when you look at the hospitality sector in Ireland, and it's a very broad sector, and I think there are hundreds of companies that are dependent on the hospitality sector. If you take people like K-Med Beds down in Kildare, you know, supplying beds, Northern Feather in Westport making duvets and pillows, Tierney's providing IT services. All of those companies are virtually totally dependent on the hospitality sector, and all of those jobs are at risk. So it's not just the kind of the narrow view that we take where we talk about 200,000 odd jobs. It's actually 1 in 5 jobs in Ireland are dependent on the broader hospitality sector. And I think, you know, one of the things I've always said to government is that we should be in an economic ministry as opposed to being stuck in, and I have no issue with Catherine Martin, so I'll be very clear about that. But the fact is we're stuck in with a whole pile of other things. It's kind of, we'll stick it wherever it kind of looks that it might fit. Whereas my view is that it's such an important element. And the other thing that if you look at the hospitality business, it brings business to regional Ireland. So it is the best spreader of regional economic activity that you could find anywhere. And I think that's conveniently forgotten about. And ironically now, of course, is that our country brethren are saying, you know, that they're going to do very well this year, whereas I've sat around the Hotel Federation table for many years and everybody complains about Dublin getting everything. Well, Dublin is not going to get everything today, so there's a little bit of poetic justice coming around that. So we'll be looking at our country brethren to kind of give us a hand in Dublin now. And by the way, I have lots of hotels in regional Ireland that will help my Dublin hotels. But I just think for future, what we need is a very strong economic policy around tourism and hospitality and what it actually contributes to Ireland. And I think that has been ignored for years. And it's my ambition, before I shake off this mortal coil, as they say, to actually have a minister for tourism as an economic minister.
We have 8 different categories, I think, to Catherine Martin's portfolio as we stand. It must be said that we have 2 Wicklow people, a Sligo man and a Kildare man here. So they cue the joke about Dublin stopping winning the All-Ireland, which we won't use. But what I will put back at Pat is Dublin's hotels are the big demand drivers are events. And in the RDS, we've lost the horse show the last week. Events need to come back for Dublin hotels to work. You can't have one without the other. Is that?
Oh, absolutely true. And the RDS is a wonderful facility, and it really supports an awful lot of the economic activity around Dublin. And it, you know, like the horse show is just one event, but there's hundreds of events that take place in the RDS every year, which are so important to driving not just the hotel business, but all the restaurants and the bars and the retail and the taxis and everybody else that you can throw in. And obviously the coach tour operators, all of those things that benefit greatly from the whole hospitality sector. So Dublin, I suppose, is driven by international travel. And it's the domestic part of it is driven by events in Dublin. So whether they're obviously events here at the RDS or they're sporting or concerts or whatever it is. And without those, Dublin doesn't function. And then on top of that, of course, we have the added complication where, because our airport, as Dalton eloquently spelt it out, essentially, without that being opened and without international travel. And like, I know from a lot of my corporate companies that they have a desperate need to get their people in to do business in Ireland, and it's the misunderstanding of what kind of business they do. Like if you look at the Intel project out in Leixlip, you know, where there's a $4 billion investment going in, they have a desperate need to get their specialist people in. They can't afford to have them sitting around in quarantine for 2 weeks. And do things like that. So we need to find a way to get to move this on, that the companies can get their people in to do the business that Ireland needs, by the way. And like, it's not by accident that Ireland's GDP was up 3% in 2020. There's no other European country as that, and that's because, to be fair to government, of the structure of the business we have in Ireland between the domestic and the FDI. And that's really the envy of Europe, in fact, that we have this. And it's no coincidence that they're attacking us on our corporate tax and all of that good stuff. But essentially, we need all of that working and working well, as do these companies, because they need that for their survival as well. So there's a whole lot of things to go on, but essentially we need a bit of joined up thinking, and we need to have a plan. And I suppose, again, if I'm critical of anything, it's about making it up as we go along. It's not really the way that businesses can operate. It just can't happen like that.
You're absolutely right. One of the big misunderstood about corporate travel is that it's individual coming in. It's a lot of hunting in groups, isn't it? FDI business comes in groups of 60, 70 engineers, people overseeing that Intel project. Ruth, is the demand there for Ireland's inbound tourism? Are you seeing signs that people want to come? And when they actually are coming online, are we doing things that our competitors aren't able to do, or are our competitors taking our slice of the cake?
Well, right now, our competitors are certainly first movers, because we, in terms of inbound international travel, have really very little to convey to the overseas pent-up demand that we are seeing daily. I mean, daily, the inbound tour operators are trying to keep the pilot light on for Ireland. They're out there virtually every other day trying to encourage their partners in the overseas markets, their customers, to continue to think about Ireland. Tourism Ireland does a terrific job in that respect. But, you know, you're doing this with your two hands tied behind your back when you have no plan and no indicative dates to say to these customers, yes, you can come. And when we see the pent-up demand, as I've said already, pent-up demand is going to be there once. The customer is moving where there's opportunity to go. And when we look at, you know, places like North America, I mean, our customers in North America, given the level of vaccine rollout out there, I mean, they simply don't understand why they can't come. Because literally the call is, I'm vaccinated, I'm ready to come. That holiday I had planned last year, I'm ready to go now. When can I come? And we can't give them any answer. And the messaging that's going out is very mixed. Unfortunately, mandatory quarantine has really put a not for sale sign over Ireland. And again, as Dalton and Pat have both said, of course, health is the primacy here, and everybody wants to be able to bring those customers back to a very safe and controlled environment. That's what all of the businesses in tourism are about, no more than the inbound operators. You know, everybody has the guidelines, they're ready to rock. They just want to be able to give the customers line of sight as to when they can come back. And there is that longer lead in time, and we can secure that business for September. We can get those commitments over the line, but we can't do it when we're sending out mixed messages into the international market, when we can't. And by the way, nobody is going, you know, to, I suppose, chastise the government if we announce a plan and something changes along the roadmap that means we have to alter it. That's happening globally, and people understand that. So the frustration right now is simply not having a plan. And we are losing, you know, on a weekly basis. Look at the amount of gateways that are currently closed off in terms of the North American market. And I know Dalton will allude to that in far greater detail than I will. But, you know, we've 10 gateways, really terrific gateways that took years to develop, that are currently now not available to us. How long is it going to take to rebuild all of that international connectivity that we've spent since the financial crisis, and the aviation sector have worked really hard, supported by the tourism industry and the government, to actually really build that successfully. And it can come back. I firmly believe that it will come back, but it can only come back if we have a plan, and we need to get all of those businesses that are across the broad spectrum of tourism to actually be able to start now getting commitments to getting those international visitors back. And that can happen. I mean, here we are in the RDS. You know, what a terrific place that has welcomed how many hundreds of thousands of international conference visitors and events and exhibitions. And again, you know, as John already alluded to, there is a timeline that, you know, we need to get ahead of here. We need to be able to give these people some form of path to recovery, to commitment as to when we can actually welcome them back. And I say everybody understands that it can be open to change. Everybody understands it's going to take that bit of time. And as Pat has said, this time we need to open and stay open. And I think the government approach in that respect is absolutely right. But that doesn't mean to say we can't have a plan. And I say if we have a plan and everybody has something to work towards, then we can actually stabilise the industry far quicker. We need to get them off life support. These businesses don't want to be on life support. They want to get back to trading in as normal an environment as post-COVID will allow them to do. So we're all anxious to get to that point, but the starting blocks for recovery can only come when we have that plan.
Dalton, one of the big surprises for me is that the aviation industry held its nerve, held its shape. We have the routes still in place in the summer schedule. We have the frequencies to places like Malaga still in place. We have new routes like Antalya, Rhodes, Santorini, Exeter that we didn't have in 2019. And a lot of the North American routes are still there. I think we've lost Miami, Minneapolis. It's all fiction at the moment because they haven't restarted. But when the restart comes, are you facing the crisis, that level of crisis that Pat alluded to, getting your new COVID environment up and running where you're dealing with larger numbers of passengers coming through, getting your staff back? You've Cork's runway closing down in September. And what's been happening with your North runway? Because when last I looked, the planning restrictions on that meant that it couldn't be used fully when it was opened. How ready is Dublin Airport for this pent-up demand and for this big return that we're all hoping for in this panel here today?
Well, it's a great question, and it's going to be the big challenge because in our particular case, we've had to reduce our staffing by a third to obviously deal with the pandemic. And so when that demand does come back, we're going to be operating in a very different way because we've had to significantly change structures and how people go about their work. So there's a lot of business readiness going on at the moment, and I don't think the travelling public will forgive us if we're not ready. So we absolutely feel the responsibility. At the same time, it's going to be a very different passenger journey, and most people watching this today can probably in their sleep navigate their way through Dublin or Cork or Shannon, because for those that travel a lot, we know how to work it out. But actually the new travel experience is going to be totally different. We're all going to have to learn to travel differently because the check-in process is going to be different, the security is different because of social distancing, etc. And for example, in Ireland, we're saying that there has to be a 2-metre gap between us in terms of spacing. But we know that, for example, in France or Denmark, it's 1 metre, and yet government guidance here is 2 metres. So we're going to have to watch all of that because very quickly you run out of space. In fact, in the terminals, capacity is reduced by 70%. So it's going to be a different experience, and we're all going to have to be ready to operate differently. And so that's where a lot of the focus is going on. You're quite right in terms of infrastructure. We need to be ready for that as well. And we're sort of doing two different things at the same time. So in Cork, we're bringing forward investment that we were going to spend next year and the year after in terms of reconstructing that runway, which hasn't had any major investment done on it in decades. We'll actually close Cork for 10 weeks from September the 14th this year. Get that done quickly so that next year we're absolutely ready. And in Dublin, we're building and bringing on stream a new runway. A new runway hasn't been built in Europe for 22 years. And we will have built it on time, on budget. But of course, there are huge onerous planning conditions with that. And we could be faced with this unusual situation that many people probably haven't fully understood, that in Dublin Airport, when we bring on this new runway next year, the overall capacity of Dublin Airport, and this is because of the planning conditions, will have to reduce at peak times by 50%. So it would mean that 50% of our flights at key periods, essentially between 11 p.m. and midnight and between 6 a.m. and 7 a.m. would have to be reduced. And that would be very significant, not just for the airport, as again, we're sort of a cog in the wheel, but for the economy, for all that FDI, if they can't get in and out in those key hours between 6 and 7 in the morning, it would be catastrophic for the country. So we're having to work through some very onerous planning there, Eoghan.
I'm just working out 2 meters, a full Ryanair flight, that's 378 meters of a queue. 3 Ryanair flights is a kilometre, and 30 Ryanair flights is 10 kilometres of queuing in the terminal. We have, and that's the level of what we used to do in a short period of time in 2019. It's going to be very difficult to see this through. Pat, is the era of mass tourism, the era that saw us out of the global financial tourism, that brought the dividend to Irish tourism, got us up and running, founded the rebirth of the economy. Is mass tourism now something of the past?
I don't think so at all. Like if you look at people now, they just simply love to travel. And when you talk to anybody, go out onto the street and ask people, given the opportunity, will they travel again? And the answer is absolutely yes. So I don't think the whole idea of mass tourism is dead. I think we're going to have to do it slightly differently, because obviously we have the other kind of issue to deal with, which is obviously our climate issue and how we manage that and how we do things much better to actually reduce our carbon footprint. So there will be challenges around that. But I absolutely believe that as people get time and space, they're going to be back in the air again. That's the message coming. And it's interesting, like even when you look at the US already, domestically, what's happening internally in the States, like the flights are back in the air, there's good capacities on them. So there's a template there that will tell us that essentially all of this is going to move very quickly. And I agree with everybody when they say that 22 will be the year that we will see a lot of this demand coming through in bucket loads, for want of a better word.
And Ruth, sustainability and tourism, not always seen in the same. Is this our opportunity to rebrand tourism and put it on the right side of that debate?
Absolutely, you're right. Never waste a good crisis, as they say, Eoghan, and certainly out of this one, sustainability. And to be fair, that's another crisis that isn't going away anytime soon. And I think the tourism industry and the travel and aviation sector were very aware of that before COVID hit, and we're very up for actually addressing that. And there's lots of opportunity now in terms of coming out of COVID to address that whole area of sustainability. As you know, as being part of the TRT, it was one of the key pillars and themes that we sought to address, and in terms of getting a plan in place for the Irish tourism and hospitality industry over that 3-year period. It certainly formed part of the ITIC plan as well, with the 29 recommendations that were in there. But more importantly, the industry is up for it. The industry gets it. They know that people and the traveller of the future and the post-COVID visitor is going to want to experience something more authentic, something that definitely does have sustainability credentials. We have the Climate Action Bill now, but it's important that we put policies in place that bring the industry and that allow the industry to actually become sustainable, because there are terrific advantages both from a cost base as much as, making sure that we are offering something that doesn't go back necessarily to that mass tourism that people talked about. And to be honest, I don't think Ireland actually ever really got there. We did get to a point maybe on a very short number of days in any given peak season where there were pinch points. But we're up to addressing that, and we had started the process of addressing that. We still have a lot of growth potential across the entire country to actually spread our tourism more broadly, and certainly that will remain at the heart of what tourism will do. And as I say, the innovation that's already there across every sector, it is a topic of conversation on every agenda, and I think it's important it stays there and that we stay committed to it. So I think it is absolutely going to play a key role as part of Ireland's recovery post-COVID.
2030, 9 years' time, what's aviation going to look like? And a short answer to the big question, does a greener aviation industry mean that people have to curtail their flights to a very, very small level? Dalton, where is aviation going on sustainability? So
it's not actually the flying that creates the problem. It's the emissions from the aircraft, and the technology that's the advancements in technology is absolutely incredible. So an aircraft today is 50% more efficient than it was in the 90s. But I think we went into the great financial crash. Sustainability was important, Eoghan. We came out of the great financial crash and it kind of got left to one side. That's not happening this time. And as 2030 comes at us, our license to operate, and I'm not talking about DAA or the airlines, I'm talking about the industry, will be curtailed. There will be very significant targets thrown at the industry which it'll have to comply with, and if it doesn't, airlines, airports will not be able to operate, period. And so this is the number one issue that the industry faces today. So will Dublin Airport be processing 32 million passengers a year like they did in 2019? Or are those sort of figures now something that are not desirable? No, I think they can. It's the footprint you leave. So if you take our particular example, we're 50% more efficient today than we were in 2006. So we've done our bit. But the hill we've got to climb is enormous. If we can't do it sustainably as an aviation sector, no, we won't be doing 32 million. If we can, we will. And I think it's very much back on us and obviously government policy to ensure that we are a sustainable sector, because the public won't take it if we're not. Crystal ball time, one line from each of our three panellists. 2030, what's going to be the biggest difference, Pat McCann?
I think there'll be a whole new awareness of what we need to do, particularly on the climate side. That is really going to be the big challenge. So I think we have to do things now that is going to get us into shape. But I'm very confident that things will happen that will allow us to do that. Biggest difference, our tourism offering to the world from Ireland's point of view, 2030, Ruth, crystal ball.
Crystal ball, I think we'll build back better. I think we will be far more innovative. I think tourism will be even more strongly embedded in every community across the island of Ireland. It'll be seen as that economic portfolio, and I think that's what's going to drive it there. And I think everybody will continue to embrace it. It's going to be the number one job creator across this country in terms of Indigenous industry. And the fact that we want people to stay in their communities and to be able to work from there. And I think tourism's going to deliver that.
I've asked you about the entire aviation industry a little bit unfairly, Dalton. So Dublin Airport, 2030, what's our airport going to look like? And what's our airport experience, more importantly, going to be?
Well, our experience will be that traditional welcome and customer service that we do today in 2030 time. But I think the sustainability agenda, Eoghan, is going to be first and foremost, and I think we would very much have an ambition to be an exemplar across Europe. Ireland's got an incredible aviation sector through the home-based aircrafts, through home-based airlines, through the aircraft leasing sector, through great airports. And I think 2030, we should be standing up strong in Europe saying we were good before and we're great now.
We are running out of time. It's been a great discussion. Thank you to the panellists, and I've really enjoyed it. I hope you, people looking in, have enjoyed it as much as I have. John?
Thank you very much to the panel, Pat, Ruth, Dalton. It was an absolutely fascinating conversation. Some very solid advice to government, and the online audience, I hope they really bought in, I think, to the messages you were pushing out. Thank you very much to Eoghan for an excellent job in hosting the discussion. While this afternoon focused on travel and tourism, I think this was a valuable discussion for everyone involved in business as we look to adapt to these changing and challenging times and build a more sustainable future. And the best way to stay informed about upcoming events here at the RDS and the Vision Series 2030 is to become a member of the RDS. But in the meantime, please subscribe to our YouTube and social media channels to keep up to date. A final thank you to our panel, and for you at home for joining us here at the RDS studios. Thank you.